Hello and welcome to this dialogue special edition, BRICS with a Stronger Voice. Russia is to host the first ever summit of a Great BRICS in Kazan, the capital of the Russian Republic of Tatarstan. With 10 members, Great BRICS currently accounts for around 32% of global output of natural gas and 43% of crude oil, and has surpassed the G7 in terms of GDP, and more than 30 countries have expressed interest in joining the bloc. What will top the agenda at this year's summit? Why is the bloc becoming so popular? And with this growing popularity and influence, is the organization shaping up to be a serious contender to the Western-dominated international order? Join me for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo.
Not only the right of each country to choose its way of development, but respect also its political system, its culture.
These new members can really amplify the voice of the Global South.
BRICS is not an anti-Western organization.
It will put Western institutions into a proper perspective.
China is absolutely leading the way in making possible for the rest of the world. The future is BRICS.
Joining me today are Wang Huiyao, President, Center for China and Globalization. Welcome, Huiyao. And Andrei Kortunov, Academic Director of the Russian International Affairs Council. Professor Radhika Desai, Department of Political Studies, University of Manitoba. Arina Marisan, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue. And Professor Nuhan El-Sheikh, International Relations, Cairo University. Ibrahim Hashem, China-based strategist and scholar. Welcome to the show. Well, we are having this expanded grouping of BRICS. Andrei, I will start with you. And so what does that mean for this group, and what are the top agenda for this year's summit with this expanded grouping?
Let me start with saying that this is a very special event for the Russian Federation. Not only because it's the first summit after the BRICS enlargement, but also because, as we know, Russia is now under very strong pressure from the West, which is trying to isolate Moscow in the international system. So it is very important for President Putin and for the Kremlin to host a large-scale event in Russia this year. And it seems that we are going to have a couple of dozen of state leaders, not only from the BRIC member states, both old and new, but also from partner countries and from international organizations. As far as the agenda is concerned, the agenda is quite diverse, and I have to say that Russia did its homework, arranging many ministerials and other governmental meetings in order to elaborate special items of the agenda. And that includes the finance issues. Russia is particularly concerned about what it calls de-dollarization of the international financial system. Hopefully some first steps will be made there. Russia is also pushing for the energy dimension, including both energy markets and managing the green transition. And of course, there'll be also an important security dimension to the summit in Kazan, and that will include probably joint efforts to counter international terrorism, maybe some issues of soft security. So the agenda is quite broad and quite diverse, but I'm sure that a lot of materials, a lot of documents that are supposed to be signed in Kazan are already in the pipeline.
Okay, a lot of expectation there. We'll touch upon the content later on, but let's focus on the integration, the new members a little bit. Professor Nuhan, over 30 countries have expressed interest or have applied for to become part of BRICS grouping. What explains this kind of increasing interest, especially from developing countries here?
Actually, BRICS introduce opportunities for Global South in general. Fair, win-win situation. So I think that BRICS fulfill the demands or the aspirations of Global South for independent way in development. Because actually our experience in Global South in general and dealing with the West, particularly in IMF and World Bank, etc., was not that much good. And even the economic relation, bilateral economic relation, was not that fair enough for Global South. That's why BRICS now very attractive because it introduces opportunities. It deals with the Global South as equal and as much fair as we can. So I think it is very attractive. It's like, some kind of a revolution over the old system, old economic world system, which is dominated only by the United States. No one has enough opportunities, even the big economies. So BRICS now have a good reputation and very attractive. It led a huge movement and very important movement toward a new world order, economic one, more fair, more balanced, and have a place and opportunities for all.
Something to look forward to. Rina, from where you are, so you also see similar aspiration to see something new, probably reforms or adjustment of the international order to make it more equitable, a fairer, probably?
Absolutely. So when you consider BRICS, I mean, BRICS is an optimistic collaborator, but a fervent competitor. And so for me, two major questions are arising this year, of course, the modalities of expansion, but also, more importantly, the second question is intertwined and how it's related to the first. And it's the impact on payments, the structural inflow of money, and pursuing global economic reform. These are incredibly important to the Global South. And yes, for many, the BRICS offers hope and change. A lot of BRICS watchers are asking if the BRICS are going to expand again to make more opportunities available. I suppose in this sense, it's important to consider practical considerations and how other avenues can be open for partnership, like joining the New Development Bank, if that's open. I think for that is possibly a fantastic litmus test for what BRICS expansion and practical expansion, what that could possibly look like. And where you have respective ministries of finance and the bank collaborating quite closely, and there's a need for significant improvement in procurement policies in order to engage in the country systems that the New Development Bank offers. So here you're starting to see a very nuanced way in which the BRICS wants to offer possibility, and which others want to hopefully engage the bank on, hopefully loans that can be engaged in local currencies. I mean, that is a fantastic addition to what the BRICS can offer. But again, it's about membership. And if you're able to access that membership, it's important.
It's important, the membership. Huiyao, we also noticed, of course, this year, the BRICS group has said that they will stop for a while in accepting new members. So probably for better integration. So I guess there are, it's a process. It takes time to integrate new members in terms of, for example, probably principles or consensus. You have new members, you have different voices, and that's need to be dealt with, right?
Well, absolutely. Personally, I still have some recommendation for the BRICS countries to have. First, I think that we should really probably institutionalize the BRICS, and of course we have a new development bank. Of course, China also initiated the AIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, but let's can make it a BRICS Infrastructure Development Bank. And also, should we have a secretary office of some kind? I mean, also let's implement more free trade agreement among the BRICS countries. There's a huge imbalance. I mean, the countries, there's 40, 50 bilateral relations among the BRICS countries. There's only 20% probably has a FTA or 10-20%, very small number. Let's really enlarge that. I mean, let's really give the benefit to the BRICS countries, and then let's really have also all the let's experiment payment system. We're not talking about de-dollarization, but let's really try to enlarge some other payment system, digital payment and all the other new experiment. So BRICS, these countries, platform can really be used as an incubating ground, a new platform experiment, but also for the development of the global South. So for the first time in the history of mankind, majority of the world population, global South, now have an organization of its own, have a platform of its own, have a say of its own, and that can make a decision on its own. And also it would be a good example. I mean, we have a different system, governing system, as we previously panelists mentioned. But if we can all work together with different systems, that's also ushering a new area which can coexist peacefully, even though we have a different system. So BRICS has many, many new roles to play, new grounds to break, and new roles to set up. So we have a lot of things to accomplish, and we have a lot of things to do.
Radhika, can the current system, current practice or mechanism inside BRICS cope with this expansion, with this, more members, probably the future membership of more countries there?
I think it can. I think that various people have mentioned what I would call many of the push factors, that is to say all the reasons why the existing structures of the world system are not working, the inherited legacy institutions are not working. So that is pushing various countries towards the BRICS. But there is also the pull factor. And I think the pull factor is that the BRICS not only represents a positive example of a very different way of doing things, of mutuality, of cooperation, but there is also the enormous economic gravity exerted by China. So I think that, as most people here will know, China has become more and more the most important economic partner for the majority of the countries in the world. So that's going to attract BRICS. And I would say that precisely because the attraction of the BRICS is based on both a pull factor and a push factor. Inevitably, this stance of balancing or multi-alignment, etc., will probably be redefined into a closer alignment with China and Russia and so on, because the reason it's happening is that the West has so little to offer. What the West is offering now is only greater subordination, greater punishment, greater exploitation. And I think that the BRICS countries are trying to evolve new forms of economic governance which distance themselves from those phenomena which are becoming more and more accentuated. So I would say that, to answer directly your question, I think that in the long run, the further integration of more and more countries is practically assured.
Picking up on that, let's take a look at the role, to be played or being played by the BRICS group. Andrei, go back to you. Of course, the Russian Finance Minister Anton Silvanov pointed out that the share of global GDP of BRICS countries has reached more than 36%, and their economic growth is much faster than G7 countries. But then here's the question, in what way, how can they play a role that is proportionate to their economic weight in today's economic system?
The first BRICS Summit took place back in 2009. And at that point, it was probably not much more than a club of non-Western countries. But over time, it emerged into something very different from a club. It is trying to operationalize its activities. It has associated or affiliated bodies like the New Development Bank. And I think that this summit will be a test about how far BRICS can go in turning itself into a global laboratory for new forms of multilateral cooperation. Indeed, there is a lot of talk of multilateralism these days, but if you look at most of Western multilateral institutions, you can probably call them quasi-multilateral because there is a very clear hegemonic power behind most of them. This hegemonic role can be benign or not so benign, but there is a lot of hierarchies in the world. I think the BRICS group is different in the sense that there is no clear hegemon within the group, and though China is by far the most powerful economic player on the bloc, but nevertheless, all BRIC countries are equal, and we see it in how they vote within BRICS-related institutions. And I think that if this summit is a success, then it will be a major turning point, and it will lead in the direction that you noted. BRICS will represent the nations and the regions of the world which are currently not properly represented. It doesn't mean that it will become anti-Western, but it will deprive the West of the monopoly on certain issues that the West is trying to keep as a kind of its own legacy and its own contribution to the emerging global order. I think the BRIC might show an alternative which does not necessarily exclude Western institutions, but it will put Western institutions into a proper perspective, so to say.
Radhika, if you look at this BRICS grouping, of course, they have established this new development bank in terms of the financial services. Of course, also they have this, what do you call, like CRA, contingent reserve arrangement, among the members, so to deal with the crisis, financial crisis, with the knowledge that this is a young grouping, young organization. So what's the potential? What can we do more to make it, to play a big role in terms of, say, the bank and also this reserve arrangement?
Well, yeah, I mean, as Professor Kortunov underlined, Russia is approaching this Kazan summit with a very deep sense of its historic importance. And it is also, and one of the reasons for that, I mean, there are many, but one of them is that Russia sees this very much as an opportunity to advance the de-dollarization agenda. Now, I've looked at a new report that has recently been published about the reform and the improvement, I believe that's the title, improvement of the international monetary and financial system that the Russian government has recently put out. And I think that it has invested a lot of thinking into analyzing what are the problems with the existing system. The existing system, we talk about the IMF and the World Bank, but actually the existing international monetary and financial system is a complex of these institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, but also a number of huge private actors, which are primarily based in the United States and constitute the United States or the dollar-denominated international system, which has been hugely problematic for the entire world, and I would also say for the United States. So the new report recognizes many of the problems. It's not just the weaponization of the system that we have seen with the sequestration of the assets, not just of Russia, but of many other countries, Iran, Venezuela, etc., North Korea, but also a number of systemic problems. So they point out there is a hub and spoke relationship. So if two countries of what Russia now calls the world majority want to do trade or payments with one another, they have to go through the hub of the system, which is the United States dominated system, in order to do trade with one another. So this has to be dealt with. It also points out that a lot of capital is flowing from these other countries, non-Western countries, world majority countries, towards the West. The West does not need more capital. The people who need capital for development are the other countries. So you have to devise a system in which development financing, development capital will flow towards the countries of the world majority. Third world countries or world majority countries also pay a huge premium for borrowing from this system. So that a new system is needed that will not require that. And there are so many other such problems. So it recognizes the problems. It also recognizes the difficulty of coming to an agreement. And it has come up with a number of measures, steps that can be taken immediately while opening up the discussion for something more ambitious. So I would say that this agenda, you are right, the existing institutions have not gone forward too much, primarily because they remain too reliant on the existing legacy institutions. So I think this push to move further, which has become more urgent for Russia, but also for many other countries, given the way in which, the other problem with the dollar-denominated system, international monetary and financial system, is that it regularly produces financial crises. We've got to move away from that because the whole world pays the price for the crises that are created by a tiny, tiny minority of people in the interest of a tiny, tiny minority of the people. So we've got to move away from that system. And I think that in the present, from looking at this report, I think the Russians have put a lot of effort into this. And I would be very interested to see how far it advances.
Mm-hmm. Arina, you were nodding your head. So, I mean, at a time of increasing, let's say, raising the interest rates of the US dollar, for example, of course, there's inflation inside the US, but then there's capital flow from many developing countries. Some of them are fragile, vulnerable to this kind of situation. So there are challenges, obviously. So hopefully this, whatever new mechanism, probably a financial mechanism there, that will help deal with such kind of challenges.
So what's interesting, and I agree with the panel, that this really pushes itself in history, in the post-World War II history that we've seen. And the West has enjoyed considerable privilege in setting the rules and benefiting from these kinds of rules. And when you look at what institutions are supposed to represent, I mean, the IMF is usually spoken about as the kind of post-1944, space that stabilized national fiscal space with the intention to further financial monetary competition and cooperation. And this was incredibly important. But at the same time, as we've come to see, these kinds of institutions are very influential in terms of cross-border institutions influencing other government institutions and within the actual economic order as well. And they have the capacity to move a considerable amount of funds while at the same time taking advantage by exercising power towards states or hosts of these particular funds, the dollar being a beneficiary of it. And so I think when you look at other opportunities, we've spoken about the CRA and how it is possibly an alternative to the IMF. This is a recognition that the BRICS need to maintain stability in the face of global financial challenges, and that a weakness in one country has the potential to impact the whole partnership, essentially. The CRA is important for what it also represents to ensure that the BRICS just do not default on loans and face this kind of dire fiscal consequences. And it's yes, it's due to assist in the short term with balance of payments and to assist this kind of short-term engagement, but it's also a recognition of where the BRICS want to be. And I'm unclear if this means that new members will join the CRA as well. Perhaps this is something that we'll see with the upcoming summit. But again, it's not necessarily relying on the de-dollarization debate or call for de-dollarization, but rather de-risking from these kinds of impacts from the dollar, essentially.
Well said. The interesting point there. I think one proposal from the Russian side has been a digital payment platform known as BRICS Bridge. The idea is, of course, to promote trade among BRICS members and also help reduce the impact of external sanctions such as that. Andrew, tell us more about that.
Well, I think that digital currencies are the flavor of the season. Everybody thinks about going digital, and I think that BRICS countries should not be an exception. It's not that easy. It takes time. It is linked to many new technologies which are just being tested. But nevertheless, there is a lot of room there, especially if this shift to digital currencies is matched by the introduction of more free trade zones within the BRICS space. Indeed, right now, we have many discrepancies in the bilateral trade relations. For instance, if you take Russia has a very significant surplus in its trade with India and Brazil. And basically, there is no way you can deal with this surplus if you stay within the bilateral framework. But if you move to a multilateral digital exchange, then it is not a problem. You can use this money elsewhere. You can use this money in trading with China or with South Africa or with Egypt. So it definitely is an important advantage. But this transition will not be too fast. That's clear. And though we can make the first step already in Kazan, but I think it will take quite some time for us to make sure that digital exchanges constitute a fair share of our multilateral trade. And of course, that does not exclude other directions in which the current financial system can and should be reformed. They talk about crypto, they talk about currency baskets, they talk about many ways how they can make the financial system more equitable and more just, more fair to all engaged. But digital currencies is definitely one of the ways that should be explored in more detail.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead, Radhika.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to further expand on that a little bit, because at the moment it is the ruble or the rupee or the yuan or the dollar or whatever that takes a digital form in the form of bank cards and so on. So the question is, how does international payments work? Now, very often when people are asked this question, people assume that if we are going to de-dollarize, then the currency of some other country needs to be the world's currency. And this is where I think what's really great about the report that the Russians have put out is they're steering clear of this idea. They are not saying that the currency of any other country should become the dominant currency. Instead, they are talking about how to enable the currencies of all countries to participate in this larger, and again, the clearing cannot be bilateral, so this larger multilateral clearing system. One thing you have to realize, if any currency tries to play the role of the dollar, it will be just as in the same manner, that is to say, the internationalization of one country's currency to be the whole world's currency, it will have the same effects. It will create the same kind of destructive financial system, which will be destructive for the whole world and for the country concerned. And again, I see elements of that in the Russian report, but I think that's very important to emphasize that if we want a more equitable, a fairer, a less exploitative, a less predatory international monetary and financial system, we cannot replicate what the dollar is doing.
Mm-hmm. Ibrahim, do you agree we cannot basically afford to have another so-called common currency to replace the US dollar, but probably the digital payment platform is the way to go?
I have allergy towards the term common currency, BRICS common currency. I'm not comfortable with the term de-dollarization, as if we are really actively de-dollarizing the financial system. This is not really what is happening now. Actually, the dominance of the dollar has been eroding for a while now. If you look at the foreign exchange reserves over the last 20 years, let's take the period from 2000 to 2021, the role of the dollar in foreign exchange reserves has gone down around 12 percentage points, from around 71 down to around 59%. And as a result of the dramatic action taken by the US government against Russia, weaponizing the dollar against Russia, and then politicizing the international financial system, we have seen a higher erosion rate in the US dollar dominance in the foreign exchange reserves, from 59 to now around 54. So that's basically 3 times the decline rate that of the initial period from 2000 to 2021. And why it's actually, why, for example, countries are not really attracted to the treasury bonds of the US government. The major reason is the underlying health of the US economy and the financial situation of the US government. If you look at the US government spending, the US government, the national debt of the US is already $35 trillion. That's a debt to GDP ratio of 125%. And then why is US accumulating all this debt? It's because of the twin deficits, the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit. So the investors, including the central bankers that have, for example, surplus in their budget, fiscal surpluses, they know the situation. They know that so the exorbitant privilege of the US government is rapidly fading away, not because, some countries are deciding to only just, de-dollarize their trade and their payments. It's because the underlying financial health of the US government, of the US economy is actually eroding. So that's one point. Right. The other point is, I like the word de-risking. Just one last point. De-risking is a lot better than de-dollarizing. Why we are now really focusing on the systems, the intra-BRICS system, the payment system, this is more practical than really going and working on common currency. This is why, if you look at the BRICS official documents over the last, let's say, 3, 4, or 5 summits, you're not going to have that term, common currency. Why? Because we know it's not really practical. Even if we have it in our mind, it's a very, 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 very long-term objective, but it's not going to happen over time.
Well, that's an interesting point, of course, in terms of this, how to look at the issue. But let's also respond probably and take a look at this kind of exaggerated views, in particular from Western media, saying, for example, from, BRICS is going to replace, G7, challenging G7 or rewriting international order, to the views, and also equally extreme, that BRICS has already collapsed. So, Andre, I want to start with you. What's your take on the, why there is such exaggerated and, unrealistic point of view?
Well, I think that there are still a lot of prejudices and misperceptions about BRICS. I don't think that BRICS is going to replace G7, and in a way, G7 has certain institutional advantages over BRICS. It is an alliance of like-minded countries. The group is much more homogeneous than the BRICS group is. However, I think what BRICS can do and what BRICS should do is to deprive G7 of its current monopoly to generate ideas and proposals that can be elevated to the level of G20 or to the level of the United Nations Security Council, and then these proposals and ideas can be accepted as universal norms. I think that BRICS can and should be one of the major sources of these new initiatives and new rules of the game. Not the only one. There are many other institutions that can also make their contribution to building this new world order, including, for instance, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or ASEAN or the European Union. But BRICS should be one of the bricks in this new building of the world order. And definitely it will never become an alliance or an integration project, because the countries within BRICS are very diverse and their priorities are different. So it is not a club, it is more than a club. But it is not an integration project or a political alliance either. It is definitely an alliance of a new type, something that can respond quickly to the new challenges and to the new problems that are emerging in the world. And this is also a union that can represent the majority of the humankind, not all of the majority. The West will still be there. The West will still play an important role in the international developments, but BRICS hopefully will play a more central role in future than it does right now.
Mm-hmm. Arina, what does the emergence of BRICS group mean? I mean, to this, in particular, to the Western world, I would say.
So depending on who you ask, some will say that the world is in an unpredictable flux. Is it a crisis of multilateralism? Is it a post-Western order? And so on and so forth, depending on whose perspective you're looking at. And what's important for the BRICS is that they've always acknowledged that their goal is not to replace existing institutions and relationships, but create space for more engagement, more opportunity. And competition should be also encouraged in certain ways, but not to an extent that it hyper rationalizes what countries are experiencing on the ground. And it also links to how power dynamics play out and how countries leverage their foreign policy stratagem. But in this sense, when you consider what the future development of BRICS is and South-South cooperation, what the BRICS have done very well is acknowledging the right for every country to compete in the international relations environment, and according to their own vision and goals. And they may have this kind of mutual respect for one another. And for the Global South, this is a quest to become an engine of self-growth that is not swayed by geopolitics. And it doesn't mean that the BRICS are benevolent actors here and that they're the savior or the reason that the Global South is going to succeed. They're pragmatic by nature. And it's very important for the Global South to manage these kinds of expectations in this regard and push for their pragmatic views and objectives. But what we're seeing is this continued trend of rising inequality, especially in terms of what is happening in the world. And there is less alignment of collective views, especially in trade and finance, especially amongst the Global South. And to some degree, the rise of China was an important moment that triggered greater global competition and new ways of looking at finance and finance for development. But it's also pushed the space where the classical Western world now feels their competition, and now you've created certain fault lines even within the Global South, and this needs to be managed more effectively going forward.
Nuhan, do you agree? Probably expectation needs to be managed. BRICS here, they are not here to competing with G7 or with whatever the current, let's say, global system, international order.
It is a very different concept from G7. The 7 countries should grow and grow, regardless what happened in the rest of the world. But BRICS is going or working with different mentality and different goals. We are building bridges and new path, which is fair and balanced toward the development. China usually mention, which is to grow together or to develop together. So it is completely different mentality. And even China, when introduced Belt and Road Initiative, they not introduce it to hegemony or to control the economic, the world economy, but they introduced it for China and the whole world to build bridges, to enhance cooperation. I think with that mentality, we can achieve a lot and we can reach a lot more than we expect and more beyond what the Western afraid of.
Ibrahim, inside this grouping, you have different countries with different political system, different ideology. It's not like-minded countries often mentioned in the Western countries. They are, of course, representing themselves, but also probably the stronger voice of the Global South.
Yeah, correct. I absolutely agree. The point that earlier raised by Mr. Henry, that maybe now is the right time to really have maybe a secretariat, maybe a more institutionalized decision-making mechanism and so on and so forth. The way I see BRICS evolving, it's really similar to the way SCO evolved. I know in China, you have this Chongye, the idiom, 莫这石头过河. So you see, you cross the river by really feeling the stones. So now that point is really critically important, especially for the new members and especially for the way forward. Now, in my opinion, I said it earlier at the beginning of our discussion today, the future is BRICS. Why I'm saying that is it's not really an opinion. It's actually represented in the numbers. By 2050, BRICS will be more than 50% of the global economy. It's already around 35% of the global economy versus the G7, it's 30%. And then if you go some years back, 2000, G7 was 40% of the global economy. And going forward, the growth rate, the average growth rate of BRICS will be around 189% versus for the G7 is going to be 50%, average of 50%. So going back to the point, why is it attractive? It's because countries see that BRICS is the future of the world, not only for China, Russia, and the 10 members now, it's for the entire world. And those who are actually going to miss the train now will have a very hard time catching up later.
Catching up later. Radhika, some would say, BRICS is more like, I don't know, OECD economic grouping rather than, let's say, likes of NATO. That's the future of BRICS.
Well, yes. So first of all, I just want to make one clarification because we've had a lot of back and forth about, whether BRICS is anti-West or not. Of course, BRICS is not anti-West. Unfortunately, the West is kind of anti-BRICS. So there's going to be some kind of confrontation and BRICS countries will have to stand up to the West to that extent. This is the context in which I want to speak. When we speak about imperialism, people mean different things by it. And I've used the term in this conversation. And I do believe that Western institutions have been imperialist. They continue to try to be imperialist, but their ability to be imperialist is declining. This is also creating, therefore, the space for other countries to emerge and organizations like BRICS to emerge. Now, the sense of imperialism is that some countries develop at the expense of other countries to whom they deny development. The pursuit of development is anti-imperialism. And I think in that sense, China, the move from, the different visions that have been articulated by President Xi and within the BRICS context and so on, they all emphasize development. And I think that is the absolute key. If BRICS continues to emphasize development, it will continue to gather more and more support, and it will also advance beyond the West. Because at the moment, what's wrong is that for the West is that it has adopted a failing economic model. It has adopted a neoliberal economic model, which means prioritizing the interests of big monopoly private corporations. Whereas in China, while there are big corporations, while they are privately owned, the overall development of the country is governed by the social priorities as set by the party and the government. And I think that has what has brought China as far ahead as it has come. And I think emphasizing that, enabling that, creating a structure of international economic governance that allows every country to pursue its own form of development with its own priorities, social and otherwise. I think that is the key, and that is what BRICS promises.
Rule of construction. Huiyao, last words, forward-looking, do you also, I also offer the opinion, probably, BRICS will get along and live and coexist peacefully with G7, basically most Western countries, for the near future.
Well, absolutely. I think that BRICS will certainly get along with G7, with all the countries. BRICS is an open platform. If G7 someday wants to join BRICS, we welcome that. I think the key is that BRICS represents a new trend, new model, and a new platform for economic development, period. That's really the key. We have been largely sustained the world in peace and prosperity for the last 80 years. It's because we had economic growth, prosperity, and the development. China has, transformed greatly from the 1979 to now, 200 or 300 times turnover of the GDP actually on the development. So that really, that golden rule has been forgotten. I think, now we are more obsessed with the geopolitical rivalry, all those ideological conflicts and religion, all those civilization clashes, whatever, which is really not really the purpose. Let's really come to the prosperity and development. And I think BRICS offer a new platform, offer a new hope, and offer a new mechanism. So that's why so many countries wanted to try this, because it's new. So I hope that we can really stick to this development and fundamentally prosperity. That is the biggest risk if we do not develop. We're going to have a big risk for everybody. So talking about the risk, let's really talk about how we can further develop and how to unite together and strengthen the multilateral system by the BRICS countries, with G7, with United Nations, with everybody. So I think BRICS is not inclusive. Someday BRICS can be a new development form. So it's all depend on us how we can develop, make it successful, and make it work.
Yeah, openness, inclusivity, and of course prosperity, and de-risking from losing the momentum of development. With that, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGT app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.